Okay, good morning, everybody. Frederic, can you hear me okay?
Clear, yes.
Okay,
Sure.
perfect. Thank you. First of all, I got to change the view. Hang on just a second here. So there we go. Okay, well, first of all, welcome. I seriously appreciate you taking the time to do this. My better half asked me, which part of Belgium are you in? Are you in the French part or in the Flemish part?
I'm right in the middle. I'm in Brussels right now.
You're in Brussels, in the middle. Okay,
Yes.
comment ça va, and welcome. Thank you for being here. I assume with the name of Leroy, I assume you are a French, the French descent.
No, actually, I'm Dutch speaking, so
You're Dutch speaking. Okay, well,
yes, I
never
have a French
mind.
name, but I'm Dutch speaking. Yeah,
Very good.
I'm from the coast side, so the top part of Belgium.
Okay, very good.
Yes.
Anyway, I watch, for those that are watching now, just because we don't have quite as much time today, but there is a very, very good video that you did with the Ice Age farmer about a month ago talking about some historical significance of what's going on today. So we probably don't have enough time to get into that, but needless to say, I know you mentioned Maurice Strong, the Rockefellers, Club of Rome, all this sort of is a background for where we are today. And I know, first of all, let me ask you, in your background, you're a professor of food science and biotechnology, and so you have a lot of insight into this, but what propelled you to have an interest in this sort of food transformation? What made you interested in that in the first place?
Yes. Well, I have a background that is rather technical. So I studied bioengineering, and that was in the 1990s, and then I did a master thesis in nutritional security, after which I started to do some research in the domain of food technology, food quality, food safety, microbiology, and so forth. And I happened to study animal source foods as a case study. So that was my case study by sheer coincidence. So I know what they mean, I know what it implies to produce those foods. I know what they mean for physiology. I know the biochemistry. And I know the broader context just because of my technical background. And then I was facing all those extreme narratives, and I saw how they were infiltrating also into policy levels and into high-profile documents. And I started to wonder why, what is happening here? This is not common sense. It's not backed up by science. It's something very bizarre. So I started to explore in more detail what was going on. And I've always been interested in the interface between the life sciences and the humanities. So I started to work together with people from other disciplines and with other expertise, anthropologists and historians, food historians, and so on. And I started to explore the narratives and the discourse analysis and whatever comes with that. And as time passed by, so I started to do this, let's say about 10 years ago, maybe. And every single year, the tone got more extreme, the narrative got more spectacular. So I just found it extremely interesting as a phenomenon. And then, of course, you had the EATLancet report, which absolutely didn't make any sense from from a policy level. And since then, I've been looking also at the politics behind the whole thing, and bit by bit, I just ended up spending a lot of time in exploring what's going on.
I want to just, that last part, you said the EATLancet report, and I saw it, and it looks like a agenda for processed food, quite honestly. But when you say it doesn't make any sense from the policy standpoint, I mean, what policy do you mean? I mean, obviously, is there a human health policy? Is there a save the planet? This is a planetary health goal. Maybe we're going to cut down on greenhouse gas emissions by doing this and somehow rescue the planet from runaway climate change, I guess would be I guess part of that. But I mean, what is the policy that doesn't make sense to you?
Yes. Well, I mean, I'm all for rethinking the food system. I mean, I'm all for improvement. And and there are parts of the EATLancet report that are valid and that are, well-intentioned and that are respectable. But it's just that within that EATLancet commission and within the things that have been put on paper, there's part of it that is absolutely, I would say, potentially dangerous for future food policies, because it's very reductionist. It's all based on top-down hard policy interventions, And it's about restriction, and it's about imposing a monolithic view on the food system on the whole planet. So they're talking about a planetary health diet, you know, so it's one diet for the planet. And from the moment policies start to restrict sets of solutions to single visions, that's always dangerous, especially because it's about interfering with one of the most complex systems that we are facing. That's the food system. The food system is incredibly complex. And rather than taking into account the complexity and trying to fix the complexity from, you know, bottom up and trying to improve what has to be improved, because clearly things have to be improved, they rather have this top-down vision where they want to upset the system. You know, they want to radically reset the system. That's a language that also comes out of the World Economic Forum, with which they are closely affiliated. So it's about resetting, it's about great food transformations. And every time, I mean, we know that from history, and we know it also from food history, basically. Every time we try to interfere drastically with a system, the system will always kick back on you. It will always do very unpredictable things. And that's the danger here. So I would say that the EATLancet diet, and it's not the only problem. I mean, I just mentioned the EATLancet diet because that was one of the things that caught my attention. It's far from being the only element here in the debates. But basically, if you look at food, there are two main elements, right? You can also talk about the ethics, but mostly it's about, as you said, it's about health and nutrition, and it's about the environment and sustainability. Now, if you talk about the environment, obviously animal agriculture is problematic, as any other food production system we are currently employing, because we're just ramping up things. And there are things that need to be addressed. So you have harmful practices and you have sustainable practices, and it's a matter of restricting the harmful practices and boosting the ones that are sustainable and net beneficial. And the same is for nutrition. I mean, you can have animal source foods, you can insert them in Western ultra-processed diets and they won't be good for you. But on the other hand, they're also packages of nutrients, right? They're very nutrient dense and valuable food. So it's a matter of producing them in the right ways, and it's a matter of consuming them in the right way. So it doesn't mean that animal production and animal source foods are without problems and that we don't have to do anything about them, but it's about how you deal with that problem.
Yeah, I want to, Fred, the community, there are people in this community right now, and I'm not an advocate that every person on the planet needs to eat a meat-based diet. I've never, ever said that. I mean, I had some ground beef just a few minutes ago for breakfast, just before I got here, and I'm thankful that I could have that. I mean, it came from a farm where they produce animals in a way that probably is beneficial to the environment. But regardless, you have people on this commission, I believe, like I think you mentioned Christina Figueres, who was a part of the UN at one point, from Costa Rica, who's out there making statements like, in 10 years, meat eaters will be not allowed to eat in restaurants and cast outside like smokers, like there's some kind of filthy, evil creature. I mean, that rhetoric obviously is very disturbing for someone like me, and probably most of the people in this community, and probably yourself. You mentioned that, and again, this EATLancet vision, the World Economic Forum, the UNEP, the what is it for sustainable development? I mean, there's the business, consortium for sustainable divisions or development or whatever it is. They are proposing not just suggesting, talk about hard and soft measures. And can we go through what has been talked about as possible incentives, disincentives, restrictions, eliminations? Talk about that sort of language and where that's coming from.
Yes, so, I mean, I would have less problems with things like EATLancet if they were just academic exercises. And you can come up with a diet and you can try to defend it in a scientific manner, and we can debate if it's, we'll have different visions. But the problem is that they're really arguing in their document, it's in the EATLancet report, they're arguing for those hard policy interventions. So they basically say we shouldn't, and that's literally what's inside the report, we should not leave it up to the whim of consumer choice. So consumers are not allowed to choose anymore, because that's supposed to be bad for their own health and for the planet. So it's very paternalistic. And you mentioned Christina Figueres. She's actually not in the EATLancet Commission. She's closely affiliated because she's actually on the board of the World Resources Institute. She's also on the board of Impossible Foods, by the way. So it's very often all intermingled. And you just have those people that have those very fanatical ideas, because also Impossible Foods and Beyond Meat, their goal is to abolish livestock. So it's not about improving as it should be. It's about abolishing it. It's about taking it away. And clearly, if you take away a fundamental part of the food system, you just take it out and you just hope that you can fill it up with all the other solutions they're coming with. Now that's experimenting. You're experimenting with the future of humanity by taking out something that always has been there, and you just, in a kind of eco-utopian manner, hope that you can fix that by producing foods in factories and in vitro and so on, and coming up with all those imitations. So, and because they know that people will not accept that, because they've absolutely realized that people will just not follow that idea. So what they do is that they come up with those plans to force population in that direction. So that implies, and you find that in documents from the World Resources Institute, documents from WWF, written by somebody that before was working for the EAT Foundation and then moved to WWF anyway. So they're all like interconnected organizations, and it's always about either taxing meat. You heard about meat taxes and the dairy taxes. It's about restricting options in public canteens, schools, and so on. So no beef and lamb anymore. It's about nudging. Right, it's about trying to play with names and settings, and so in the retail, for instance, you will have to put the plant imitations on top of the shelves, and you put the meat at the bottom, so people will not, bend down and take the original one, but take the imitation that is easier to reach. So it's about accessibility. It's about policies, about subsidies. It's about incentives. It's also about benchmarking. That's something that is coming up in the last months very clearly. There's something called the World Benchmarking Alliance, and the World Benchmarking Alliance is a consortium where you'll find the EAT Foundation, but you also find all the other players, the usual suspects, basically. They're all inside that alliance. And so they want to benchmark. They want to benchmark companies. So if you're a company and you produce animal source foods, you will be downgraded in their system. So you will get an evaluation, and you will be less attractive for investors. And if you want to play the game, and because investors are very closely connected to the whole sphere as well. You have loads of investors around the whole circus, and big ones, right? So it's about upgrading companies for investment reasons or downgrading them. It's about getting into school curricula and change the way young people think about food, about the food system. So they have the messages, go plant-based to save the planet, and they're trying to get that message all the way down to the youngest ages, because clearly they understand that people from our generations will not change. I mean, we will not go for their ideas, but so they hope that they can again reset the whole perception, the public perception, by starting at the youngest levels of society and trying to reset it and come up with their own future of food. Because for them, it's about the future of food. It's a radically different food system that they want to impose, and by knowing that people will not accept it, they want to force it upon us. And that's the language that has been used, for instance, also by the founder of EAT, Gunhild Stordalen, in the UN Food System Summit right now in the Action Track 2. She said clearly ahead of the summit already, she said, look, this is a great opportunity for us, because like this, we will be able to force the planet into accepting the changes they desperately need, the people like us desperately need. So they think that we need stuff, but we're not mature enough to understand what we need, so they're going to do it for us.
Yeah, the assumption is I don't know how to eat, and therefore you need to teach me how to eat and then force me how to eat that way is a bit scary. I mean, when we look at the players involved, the World Economic Forum, EATLancet, there's many corporations that have lined up behind this. The meat industry as it stands today, and I look at that, I think it's around a $1.3 trillion industry. It's not a small player. I mean, it's definitely has its own resources and its own, capital to perhaps say, hey, this is not what we're interested in. how much power does this group that wants to, the EATLancet and the other cast members, how much power do they actually have relative to maybe people that may not be interested in this?
Well, they're highly connected. That's the whole idea. I mean, they're highly connected because even, again, the founder of EAT is a young global leader of the World Economic Forum. She basically called the EAT initiative a Davos for food. So it's a branch of the whole World Economic Forum's plan for transition, which they call the Great Reset. But it's affecting all layers of society. But there's also, of course, clearly a program for the dietary future. And EAT has to be seen as a Davos kind of intervention. It's within the Davos philosophy. So what does that mean? It means that it's an initiative that belongs in the setup of public-private partnerships, like they have been launched at the time by Maurice Strong in the early 90s during the Rio conference. And they're very close to the World Business Council of Sustainable Development. They're close to the World Economic Forum. In the advisory board of the EAT Foundation, you'll find people from BlackRock, for instance. You'll find all the kinds of investors and people from the high-tech Silicon Valley type new spin-off kind of vegan tech imitation factories. So they're endorsed. Investors endorse them. Governments endorse them. Many people, because not everybody is able to decode also what this is about, right? Because it looks benign. If you say, look, we're going to invent a diet and it's going to be based on plants and it's for the better of the planet and it's also better for health, and it all looks very wholesome. It all looks very benign. It's just if you look closer that you start understanding that this actually can have serious, detrimental effects on society. But you don't really see that if you just look superficially. And I think the problem is that most of the people that are into, in policy settings hardly understand what the EATLancet diet is about. It's published, the diet has been proposed as a scientific publication in the Lancet, which is one of the most prestigious journals. In the EATLancet Commission, you'll find people from Harvard, you'll find people from Oxford. So it has this prestige. It has this appeal to authority that makes it very difficult to question it, right? If you don't know the details, if you don't look through the glamour and start understanding that behind that facade, there's some people there pushing for extreme interventions, not just optimizations or not just improvements, extreme interventions. They call it the great food transformation. That's the language they use. It's the great food transformation with capital letters. And also they talk, resetting the table. And it's, if you want to improve something, if you want to improve something, you try to make the best of it. You carefully weigh the harms and the positives, and you make a balanced decision on, but you don't start resetting things. That's foolish. You don't reset the food system. Even that idea is it's a mad idea to reset the system. That's absolutely asking for dangerous, pushback from that system. And but I'm afraid that most people in the policy space don't understand it. And I'm also afraid that until recently, most of the people most of the stakeholders of the animal production sector, were not aware of what's going on. You see it passing from time to time, maybe in the newspapers, and you see the crazy headlines as well, and you just ignore them. You say, well, this is, it's hyperbolic. It will never pass. Until you start realizing that at this very moment, they are in charge of one of the action tracks of the United Nations Food System Summit. And this means that at some point in time, there will be a document coming out of a UN summit, and that will have a very, very strong authority again. So it always plays on authority. So, and then it will trickle down nationally, globally. And the messages will trickle down into policies nationally. So the way they're doing it is getting around the normal democratic bottom-up processes where people decide, and you elect politicians, and you know what the politicians are standing for, and they will do the things they do, and then you will either vote for them again, or you will next time you punish them, and they will not be re-elected. That's the normal democratic process. But this here is so opaque that it doesn't really pass from the traditional democratic decision processes, because it's advice that comes from transnational organizations and goes down into national policy making, decision making systems. And there's not much consultation, and before we know it, we see something like a meat tax or something. I mean, it didn't happen yet, but it may as well happen in the very near future.
Yeah, you talk about, you know, the sort of the draconian, you know, if you look at the EATLancet on their optimistic goals, it's basically zero meat, zero dairy, or next to it, whereas it, you know, as a more modest tone, it's still a significant reduction. But within that scope, I've seen, you know, Gunhild Stortelen actually comment on regenerative style animal agriculture. I've seen the guy who's the vice president, the good fellow from India, talk about the need for pastoralists. And so, what role does that have in this system? Is it just throw the baby out with the bathwater? We just need to get rid of all the cows on the planet. You know, obviously the impacts on, you know, manure and fertilizer production and all the things that they are beneficial outside of direct food consumption. What do you see coming out with regard to, you know, I just don't see how we have a food system without animals. Even if we didn't eat them, they would still need them unless we're going to go to a fully synthetic fertilizer situation. You know, as you know, most developing countries are still practicing in a pastoralist fashion. You know, so many people depend on livestock for their sustenance and source of income and you know, and lifestyle. What are the thoughts on that coming out of these people as far as what do we do with that situation?
Mm. Well, sometimes people make the mistake of depicting the Lancet diet or similar initiatives as a veganization of society. It's not a veganization of society. That's a wrong interpretation. They never said that. They never said abolish all livestock. Some of them do. I mean, within the commission, there are some, you know, more hardliners, but they want to reduce it to circular levels. You know, which sounds all right, you know, if you can reduce production to circular levels and then, you know, you have a circular system and all is fixed. But it is all about how you define those circular levels and how you deal with the existing systems that, you know, have to be sustainable. And how much can you get out of that? I mean, these are complicated debates, but according to them, it's about reducing it to extremely low levels, basically, because that's the levels you'll get out of that planetary health diet. And it, for instance, it means that look, for instance, in the EAT diet is the model that is used in an organization which is called the Food and Land Use Coalition. And the Food and Land Use Coalition is trying to design trajectories for the planet. So every country is put on a trajectory and they predict, or they're advising that that country should, you know, follow this diet by the year 2030, 2050, and so on. So it's about the future of certain countries. And for Australia, for instance, they said, well, Australians in a couple of decades, they have to reduce their red meat consumption with 90%. So 90% down. So that's where you have to go down. So it's not about abolishing everything. It's not a vegan diet. You could call it a quasi-vegetarian diet. You can eat some, not all that much either, but you can have some dairy and you can have some eggs and you can have some fish. But at very, very low levels. So it's not about promoting a vegan diet, although the vegan option is accepted by them. So they also allow for vegan, you know, the vegan variations, but it's quasi-vegetarian, right? So, so there is space for animals, but it's not about, you know, we have this false illusion that sustainable animal agriculture has to be at low levels. It's not. You can actually, if you want to deploy animals in for instance, multi-paddock approaches or some regenerative practices, you need to have sufficient animals to do that properly. And how much you can have, and will be able to keep the current levels of meat intake. I'm not able to answer that. I think it's the wrong approach. I think what is a mistake here, and that's probably because many of the people in that space have an economic background, so they look at the food system as a spreadsheet, right? So they look at the food system as if it were, you know, parameters that you can just calculate and model in a spreadsheet, and then you make your prediction and you impose them. No, that's the wrong way to do it. What you have to do is to start to make the best of your mosaic of different production systems and potentialities that you'll find on the planet. You'll find places on the planet where you better grow animals, and you have other places that are suitable for crop agriculture, and everything. I mean, the type of system you will impose in each place will depend on the context of that place. So you better fix all those micro production systems and see where you get. No, it's but gradually and carefully, and not drastically, because we have a planet to feed. We cannot just experiment and see everything crashing down. So it's about improving, transitioning to indeed better systems that are more closely related, or more careful about how the plants and the animals and the soil are integrated, and do the best possible and come up with the best possible solutions for each specific micro context. And then you see what you'll get. And you don't start like from scratch and saying we go all the way this way or this way. You do that carefully. You transition carefully, rationally, with the best of science, and especially also with the practical wisdom that are to be found in farmer organizations. And you see, which ones are doing better, and you give them a boost, and then you discourage practices, and you put some red lines. You say, look, we're not going to tolerate deforestation. We're not going to tolerate water pollution that exceeds certain levels. We're going to draw red lines, and then this is the play field, and everybody makes the best of it, and we'll put the best of science in to make it better. And we'll see how much meat comes out of that. It could perfectly be that it's a lot less than we're eating today, but maybe it's not all that different. It's very hard to tell that. The problem is that those kind of modeling studies are just making such broad assumptions that are so debatable that they don't mean a lot. It's not. So these targets like halving meat intake or 10% of the meat intake, they're just like numbers that they throw them around, and they have some very debatable assumptions to justify them.
Yeah, I mean, for a long time, and arguably still today, the United States, at least in westernized nations, has kind of almost dictated much of the global food policy. We came up with the food guidelines in the 1980s, and many countries followed suit. And what this EATLancet report almost uses, what you're describing is almost a diet of maybe perhaps India, India being a largely vegetarian country. And you point out that, and we look at some of these countries that have these, low meat consumption diets, there's a high rate of stunting among the population. We have all these children and adults that have nutrient deficiencies, and they don't grow properly. They end up smaller. There's a bioethicist out there advocating for smaller human beings, as if that doesn't come with any other consequences. And among the many problems with the U.S. diet, one of them isn't a high rate of stunting. We have a lot of big people. Many of them, unfortunately, are obese and overweight and metabolically sick, but we don't have that issue. And so, are we trading one problem for the other by doing this? And obviously, it's not a secret that these countries that seriously restrict animal or for reasons of poverty end up with a stunning issue. And so, how much does that play a role in these people's calculation, do you think?
Well, a lot is because of the EATLancet diet has been mostly designed by Walter Willett, so it's all about nutritional epidemiology of chronic disease and about associations with chronic disease, and the focus is there. The focus is not on the essential nutrition all that much. It's mostly on avoiding chronic diseases, and that's where they put their weight. It's interesting that India is used by the EAT Foundation as their ideal example. So there's one document that they produced not so long ago where they talk about India and Indonesia being, the few countries on the planet today that are fitting within the planetary boundaries. They're projecting them. So they're promoting them as the ideal diets because it has these connotations of vegetarian diets and so on. And that is dating back to the 19th century. We know that the Theosophy was already doing that. They were talking about India as the perfect place on earth because it was more mystical, it was more wise, they were eating better. And it's romanticizing from a Western point of view, it's romanticizing a situation that is actually not representative of reality. So first of all, the Indian diet is not vegetarian. I mean, you have vegetarian tendencies, and it's complicated. You have many different ethnicities and different cultures within India. That's already something to start from. And then, as you say, it's also a country where you have very high levels of stunting in young children, from infants to 5-year-olds. You have tremendous stunting rates. Now, it's difficult to say if that's only because of the animal source foods, because it's an observation that the causality is not always that clear. Because there are many interfering factors. It's poverty, it's all kinds of different interferences there. But clearly it doesn't help, because we also know that if you go to the global south and low and middle income countries, we also know from intervention studies where you actually try to demonstrate, more of the causal links, that if you intervene with supplements of meat and dairy and eggs, or any animal source foods, and you bring in those nutrient dense packages of foods in the diets of children, they improve physically, and they also improve with respect to their cognitive capacities and their performances at school level. So clearly, it's if you take away one of the most robust elements of the diet, because that's what we're doing, and so we're arguing of what's happening here is it's very remarkable, basically, because animal source foods have always been valued as the most, they've always been the most cherished elements of the diet, because they're so powerful, they're so dense in nutrients, they're so nutritious, and people just know that from empirical experience over the ages, that those foods are absolutely to be valued. And now we're talking about taking them out of the diet, and for reasons that are going into all kinds of directions, but and then just replacing it with with plants and plant-based imitations of the foods you're taking out. That's the most surreal part. So you're taking out the animal foods and you want to replace them with imitations that are made from extracts and starches and protein isolates and so on. So it's a very bizarre move in the first place. I lost a bit your original question, but it's clearly not helping if you're taking a large. So this is a restrictive diet. So it boils down to restrictive diets, and it's not only in places like India that we see the consequences of having poor access to animal source foods. It's also, for instance, in the West. There are some studies from the 90s in the Netherlands, for instance, where they looked at the diets of children that were in macrobiotic, they grew up in macrobiotic families, so they were receiving macrobiotic diets. And they were underfed, they were undernourished. You had stunting, you had micronutrient deficiencies, and it's interesting that the macrobiotic diet is very, very similar to the EATLancet diet. It's almost, if you see it, it's almost the same. It's about the different philosophies about yin and yang and balancing the yin with the yang, and the one food is too much yin and the other one is too much. So it's this whole spiritual background, but in the end, it's the same foods. They promote whole grains, they promote nuts and those foods, and then they discourage things like eggs and meat, also potatoes, which is interesting because both EATLancet and the macrobiotic diet are not all that fond of potatoes. So they're very similar diets, and those diets translated in problems, in young children. So it's an experiment. It's a historical experiment. We know what the dietary guidelines have meant for the West. How that affected the food system and how the food industry followed that advice and changed the foodscape. So we know that this was an experiment. Now this is an experiment that goes way beyond everything we've seen before.
Let me ask you, because you talk about kind of this monolithic approach to food. There's this sort of unifying vision of what the world should look like. Outside of the food, what else does what's his name, Strong, have what does the world they want to look like? Outside of just the food, obviously we're all eating a highly processed, mostly plant-based diet. What else is going on?
Well, this is another. Well, I don't know where to start here because it's very complicated. Indeed, a lot goes back to Maurice Strong, and Maurice Strong is the father of UNEP. Right? He founded. He created UNEP. So he's behind the Stockholm Conference and the Rio Conference, and he was also very influential within the World Economic Forum and within the World Business Council for Sustainable Development and within the World Resources Institute. So all the same players we're seeing today gravitating around the EAT Foundation are organizations where Maurice Strong was either a founder or a member of the board of directors and so forth. So there's a link with Maurice Strong. And the link is one that goes also back to the vision of Maurice Strong. And you have to know that Strong, so there are a lot of conspiracy theories around Maurice Strong, and especially from the so, you know, from in ultra right circles, and so a lot of those theories go way too far. But anyhow, we know that Maurice Strong was very deep into New Age. So especially his wife, Hannah Strong. So they were both into the New Age thinking. So that's important because it helps to explain why those people and how those people develop their visions on what has to be done with the planet. The New Age thinking is something that is based on transitions, right? So it's about transitioning to a new level. That's what New Age is about, and it's, you know, it's very spiritual. It has to do with, you know, astrology and with spirits and consciousness, especially. So it's developing a higher level of consciousness, and it means transitioning into a new age. And for those people, the transitioning, of course, is connected to the way we live. It's connected to the way we eat, and it's connected to the way we think. So in the New Age church, and I mean, we have to be careful here, and that's why it's a bit difficult to explain that we're not conflating all those issues with what we EATLancet today. You know, I'm just sketching where the transition idea is coming from. I'm not saying that, you know, EATLancet is a New Age initiative, but the mindset at the origin of the transition idea is founded in United Nations spheres around Maurice Strong and some of his closer affiliates like Robert Mueller and Donald Keyes. And those people wanted to come up with solutions that are single and multiple at the same time. That's what you have also still today with the planetary health diet. So it's one solution, and they claim it's a diversity. They claim it's very flexible and everybody can fit it in as they like. No, it's not true. It has very small windows with respect to foods and nutrients. So it's about, you know, reducing diversity by putting it into one solution. And they do the same with religion. You know, the New Age religion is a hotspot of every other religion. So they put everything inside, and they try to fit all world religions into one religion. You can try to fit all diets into one diet. You can try to fit all other aspects of human diversity into a single solution. And that's what, you know, the New Age approach has brought in the 1970s, 80s, and so on. And it's somehow, they never got over that mindset at, you know, those higher policy levels. The people that are in futurists, especially, because things like the TELUS Institute and, you know, other institutes which are think tanks and futurists, they are stuck in that New Age based transition idea, and about, you know, coming up with scenarios and solutions. And that's profoundly dangerous. Those are sometimes mad ideas, and they want to impose them. And that's where it gets bizarre and dangerous. I don't know if I'm explaining it as well, because it's a very intricate matter. But it certainly is not to be uncoupled from those organizations and people and ideas that come out of such things as, you know, also the Club of Rome, for instance. The Club of Rome and the Limits to Growth report was about this Malthusian idea that the planet is moving in a certain direction. We're depleting resources, population is growing, and we have to fix that. And we're going to fix that by transitioning. We're going to impose a program, and we're going to save ourselves. No, it's this thing. It's this architectural view on the planet. It's people that want to come up with solutions, and, you know, in a way, it's genuine. You know, they do that well-intentioned. They think that is the way to go. We're gonna design a solution, and if you follow our solution, this track will bring you right there to utopia. If we don't do anything, which you will call business as usual, then you will into catastrophe, and then you have a range of other scenarios. It's about modeling. It's about trajectories, and it's about offering monolithic solutions, which they depict as diverse solutions. It's very weird how that clashes with you know, the views of ordinary people.
Yeah, it seems like almost none of the models that I've ever seen projecting the future have ever been correct. I mean, the models always tend to be wrong for whatever reason. There's always seems to be unintended consequences, and it's as if we never really learn from those types of things. I mean, obviously, you know, you paint a fairly dystopian sort, I don't know if it's dystopian, but you point a view that many of us would not like to see happen in the future. Many of us would not like to see happen, particularly when it regards to access to certain food. I mean, I would be personally very, very distraught if I had to subsist on 7 grams of meat a day, I think I might perhaps even be dead. But what are you hopeful in any way about some stuff? Do you see some perhaps good signs that have come out recently? I mean, this discussion has become, I mean, I think one of the good things of all this upheaval we've had in the last year was we have a lot more open discussion. Now, some of it is obviously confrontational, and there's a lot of perhaps anger in that, but at least the discussion is being made. And do you see people talking in the right direction, perhaps?
Yeah, well, it's certainly a wake-up call. You know, it's a wake-up call, and it's in. I mean, there's no point in being either apathic about it or either being resentful about it. I mean, we have to make the best of what's coming, and you have to see the positive effects as well. You know, even the Lancet Diet is a wake-up call in a way, because indeed we have to realize that we cannot just do what we're doing. I mean, I'm never arguing for status quo. I'm never saying we should leave things as they are. This is not what I'm saying. So, and if there is somebody messes up the conversation and says, look, we're going to do something extreme here, then at least the other people will start thinking, oh, maybe something is wrong indeed. And that's the good part of it. I mean, we should improve several aspects of the food production system. It may help us think about, you know, how we deal with chronic disease. Indeed, I mean, we have an increasing problem with poor metabolic health in the West and in the rest of the planet as well. I mean, it's equally valid for the global South, and the production system. Animal welfare is another one. I mean, we have to reconsider animal welfare in many systems too. So it has its. The problem is that we always, I mean, the whole debate and everything we do and everything we look at, we always have this illusion that things are either good or bad. No, it's not true. Every single thing we face in our daily lives is both good and bad. I mean, everything has both positive things and negative things. It's a matter of balance. You know, it's how you weigh things and make the best of the elements that surround you. If you look at something like meat, you know, meat is good for you, but it can also be bad for you if you grill your meat until it's black, or if you eat deep fried nuggets all day long. That's not going to be good for you. So it can be that things have at the same time good and negative effects. You know, that's intrinsic to reality, and humans, and probably especially Westerners or Western urbanites in particular, tend to have this binary vision that things are either good or bad, either animal or plant, either nutritious or non-nutritious. So it's a spectrum, and it's complicated. Everything is complicated, and it's about making wise decisions. So there's a call for wisdom here. I mean, for wise approaches to the food system, not the radical approaches, not the binary ones where you say, you know, the animals are the bad things and the plants are the good things. It's about, because there are many awful things happening on the plant side as well. It could be useful to just make us think about this system and say, look, we have to fix certain things urgently. And so in a way, I welcome it as well. You know, I criticize it a lot, but I'm also welcoming it as part of a debate. And I'm just, of course, quite upset about the interventionist angle. You know, that they just, and that's where it may, and that's where my fear is, that damage may be done on the way. I mean, it helps a discussion, dialogue, it helps the debate, but because they're so interventionist, because they're so keen on intervening very quickly and drastically, it may create a lot of damage, which may result in, for instance, farmers getting out of the food system. You know, because being a farmer is no joke. I mean, it's hard work. You're getting vilified all the time. You don't get the respect you deserve. You're providing those people that come up with their crazy ideas, the food that they can find in their supermarkets is provided by the same people that they're targeting very often. So it's not a very attractive profession anymore. So farmers may drop out of the system. Food prices may go in crazy directions. Many things can change, and the damage that will be done will not always be reversible. Because imagine that indeed we're going to replace, you know, all the animal source foods with the imitations. We're going to discourage farmers so that they drop out, and we can produce foods in factories. We can make in vitro meat and all kinds of, you know, maybe even in vitro plants. And it's not only about the animals as foods in the end, because sometimes it's about farming as a whole. We see that with George Monbiot also, for instance. He wants to create food from thin air and eat those, artificial pancakes instead of all agriculture, so that he can rewild the planet. So that can create damage that will be difficult to undo, because how are we going to go back once the food system is under control of those corporations and those patents and those big, investors that get a hold on it? That's the dangerous part. But otherwise, I mean, any debate or any even extreme idea is always welcome to me. I like extreme ideas. It doesn't mean that we have to implement them.
Hey, Freddie, I'm going to curse you with an evil, awful ability that you solely are in control of the world's food supply. You have all the power. Given your background, I mean, you're probably more qualified than some people, or certainly more qualified than me. What would you do if it was up to just you, Frédéric Leroy, to say this is how the world should think about eating and how we should eat? What would you do?
Well, I think one thing we should not ignore here is tradition. I mean, I think traditions are tremendously important, because traditions are wisdom at population level. I mean, traditions are there for some reason. I don't think traditions are static, or it doesn't mean that we should abide with them at all costs and just, dogmatically think about traditions, but they're a source of wisdom. And there are many things to be discovered in traditional approaches to food. And the diversity of traditions, because traditions develop in a specific context. They develop as a solution to local problems, right? That's how traditions originate. All traditions at some point were innovations, right? But they develop over time, and they have a kind of Lindy appeal. So they are long-term solutions, and they're rich, right? Traditions are very often rich. I mean, they have cultural connotations. It's about identity. So what I'm saying here is that we should rethink our traditions, honor the traditions. Don't dogmatically just follow whatever your grandparents did, but rethink what they did, see what's there. That's one thing, and then fertilize them with the best of innovation. With innovations that are solid, and innovations that come from practical, tangible results. We can, for instance, we don't have to stick to traditional agriculture as such, because there's things in traditional agriculture that are not fit anymore to feed today's populations. But we know that there are certain farmer communities that develop new techniques. We can use those techniques and try them to insert them carefully in the new system, in the global systems, and learn from them. But I would say, don't throw away the traditional approaches and start from scratch. I mean, it's again, don't reset. Use what's valuable from the past. What our ancestors did was quite sensible in many cases, not always, but in many cases it was. And that is antagonistic in a way to outsourcing all knowledge. So get back to the practical wisdom locally, and don't outsource it to companies that will do it for you. So don't let those companies make the ready meals for you. I know it's a difficult discussion, because not everybody has either the time or the resources to cook from scratch at home and everything. But there should be ways to valorize that more, to make it more affordable, to make it more possible at community level. I think community-based approaches. So if you put me in charge of the food system, I would immediately delegate my power at community level. I think the future is at community level, where I'm very much a believer in bottom-up approaches. And bottom-up approaches can only work if there's a traditional component inside, if there's diversity involved, so that it's locally fit for the best answer to a local problem. And it's just so much richer. It's just so much more motivating to people that they can connect to something. Because people are lost. Frankly, people are, one of the reason why there's so much interest in all those, corporations that, will provide us with those fake foods, is because people are profoundly lost. And they would like to see answers as well, but you just don't find them. And I think the bottom-up approaches are a way to provide that. And it would mean steering away from those, urban classes that are hit by anxieties, and everybody is anxious nowadays. It's not very pleasant anymore to talk to people very often because everybody's like lately is anxious, and it's about everything is catastrophic, and there's a need for something that grounds us again. And I know it sounds vague and it sounds maybe a bit philosophical and it's not a practical answer to your question, but I would say that the bottom-up way is the best way to deal with this, because we are humans in the end, and humans have certain needs that are historical, and food is extremely important. If you think about what food means to us, it's the thing that gets us around the table, and that is the cement for societies. That's how food functioned in the past, right? If people got together, it was around food. Sharing food is sharing food made us human. Sourcing that food, you know, and sharing it in between us is what made us human. And if you're just gonna neglect that and just, you know, buy your food and consume it as a fuel, then you're losing something. So promoting commensality, promoting nutrient-rich foods, so that we can replenish our needs, you know, physiologically, providing essential nutrition at the basic levels, commensality on top of that, and that would fix already quite a lot. And the inspiration, I think, is for a large part in traditional diets.
Yeah, I thank you. I have to say that the wisdom to say I delegate it down to the community level is, I think, is very, very profound. I think that's great sentiment, and I think there's a lot of value in that. I mean, you know, there's some communities that, you know, and I guess you'd have to define communities. There's some people live in the middle of the deserts in New Mexico. They're not growing a lot of food. There's just not much there for them. But there's a larger, you know, maybe it's a range of 200 miles or something like that. But one thing I want to ask you, it's maybe my cynical belief that sometimes the science comes after the narrative. And I think, you know, we're going to see this narrative around cultured meat in particular, you know, and the way they'll make it is they'll probably, you know, they'll grow it in the lab and it'll be animal protein, and then they'll mess with the fat and perhaps maybe skew towards unsaturated fat. And then all of a sudden we'll hear how good animal food is as long as it's coming from a cell, you know, from a cell-based technology, because we've taken care of the evil saturated fat. And we'll have lots of studies saying now that animal protein is no longer bad for us because it doesn't come attached to saturated fat. Do you find that sometimes the science follows the narrative comes out first and then the science is later done to support that? Is there any truth to that, do you think?
Oh, yes. We see that science is being mobilized to support ideas, and it's not, I mean, don't see science generating new visions and it's the other way around. There's because it's very interesting, Shawn, if you look at what we see today is not new. Nothing of what we're seeing today is new. Even the extreme scenarios, even the cultured meat, or, you know, the social engineering, or the sustainability, it's all been done before and been said before. It's just that it's amplified because of the fact that we have huge players involved now. But every single thing we are seeing, the Meatless Mondays, everything was already there in the 19th century or in the beginning of the 20th century. People were saying the exact same things. And there were several episodes. For instance, in the First World War, there was, you know, social engineering and social pressure for people in the States not to eat meat, so the Americans could ship it to Europe for the hungry Belgian children, you know, during the war. So they had all kinds of systems in place to discourage meat consumption, and you were a good citizen if you were not eating meat. So the whole idea was already there. But also what we've seen is that the imitation food industry, so those foods that claim to be the same as meat and to claim to taste the same and they look the same and they smell the same, those marketing slogans were already used at the time of the Seven Adventist movement in the 19th and early 20th century. Kellogg, for instance, he developed the first fake foods, the fake meats, the fake butter, and so that he did that at the time, and he marketed it as something that will replace meat. It looks the same, it smells the same, but it's better. And the interesting thing is that also even then they used the science to come up with that idea. And that idea, it was nothing scientific. That idea had to do with religious visions on how meat corrupts the body and how that was connected to masturbation and who knows what. But they used the science to make it more acceptable to the middle classes, to connect it to an industry, to make money out of it. by promoting the scientific appeal of it. So they developed science in support of that idea rather than the other way around. And a lot of what we're seeing today is people that start from a belief system. And that's why I mentioned the part about the new age and the transitions before. So they start from a mindset, they start from a belief system. They don't even realize in many cases that the belief system is in place. But they start from this and then they collect the science and they develop the science to do that. And it's the reason why they can do that so easily in nutrition and also in the environmental studies is because the science is so complicated. It's not about, aeronautics or aerodynamics where you throw something in the air and if it crashes, it didn't work. So you have clear results. It's more difficult to evaluate the science. And if you evaluate something, for instance, in the environmental field, what you have is a ratio, basically. You have a ratio saying that you will have the ratio on the top part of it. You will have the effect. You will have, for instance, so many hectares or so many liters of water or so many CO2 equivalents. And at the denominator, you will have the unit of food, right? So you will have, for instance, CO2 equivalents per kilogram of food. Now you can do anything you want with this because that ratio is so overly simplistic, and you can try to optimize system based on this. But what you're not doing is looking at the complexity behind this. That would be the actual scientific intervention. Because, for instance, if you take liters of water, well, you have to differentiate between green water and blue water and gray water. If you look at CO2 equivalents, well, you have to think about how methane and CO2 behave differently in the atmosphere, and the circular systems and the GWP star and everything that comes with this. You could talk about land, and you have marginal land, you have other land, and so forth. So that's a whole, differential part is completely neglected. And then the unit of food, kilograms, don't mean a thing. I mean, you can only compare per kilogram if you compare fairly similar foods. If you compare beef with beans, those are completely different foods, and you cannot work on with kilograms. You cannot even work with kilocalories, or you cannot even work with protein amounts, because the nutrition behind it is complex. So what I'm saying is that all the complexity that you would need if you want to have a true scientific approach to evaluate, different scenarios are thrown out, and they use reductionist metrics as if they represent reality. And then you can come up with a model and you can show, yes, indeed, well, this plant-based diet of ours is the best of possible choices because it leads to a minimization of the impact based on the metrics that they are putting forward. But those metrics don't mean a thing if they're divorced from reality. And if they ignore, the intricate, the very complex backgrounds that are behind impact and behind nutrition as such.
Yeah, when you get to define the goalposts, it's very easy to win the argument.
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah.
Point there with that. You can look at nutrient density versus resources used to grow that food, and it's a very different metric and very different outcome. One of the things you pointed out, and I pointed this out in the past, but I think it's worth repeating. Gordon Guyatt was a senior author on a large study that came out in 2019, the Nutri-X study, which I know you're familiar with. When they came out and said, looking at the evidence, all the available evidence, looking at red meat, we don't see a reason to cut back on it. We don't see any high quality level evidence that would suggest it causes heart disease, cancer, and so on and so forth. That study was then heavily attacked by people like the Physicians Committee for Responsible Medicine, led by Neil Bernard. They tried to petition the FTC to have the journal retract that. What are your thoughts around censorship of the science? We're seeing some of that occurring as well, and nutrition is not the only place where we're seeing that, unfortunately, with some of the other stuff that's going on. What are your thoughts around the danger of perhaps censoring scientists?
Oh, it's very dangerous. It's also outrageous, basically, if you have scientists that are trying to prevent the publication of articles that don't correspond with their vision by bullying editors into non-publishing it. That's what happened here, right? So it's about trying to prevent something that contradicts your worldview or your message or your own narrative. And so not only, criticizing it and coming up with a response, because the response they came up with was just a smear campaign. So they said a couple of things on a scientific level, which were very poor, I have to say. And then they tried a smear campaign just to accuse the authors of conflicts of interest, which is, again, very silly, because if you look at the ones, it's the pot and the kettle kind of story. But But the fact that they try to prevent publication, that they harass the editors and the journal not to publish this, this is incredible. So there's an interesting article in JAMA where a journalist discusses or with an author, I don't know if she's a journalist, but anyway, there's an article in JAMA where the author outlines what happened in detail. And at some point it's mentioned that, look, not even the National Rifle Association would act in this way. This was over the line, really. And that's dangerous, right? If you cannot have a clear debate anymore, if you cannot have a discussion on things that you don't agree with, it's the death of science, it's the death of critical thinking, and it's dangerous, especially also because it affects the policy making. We're not talking about fundamental sciences here, no, that are just a matter of academic discussions in the background. No, we're talking about science that will be used at policy level. And if this is an unbalanced science where part of it is suppressed, well, policymakers will only see that what comes out of it. You know, they will only see the things that are published. And you have those prestigious journals that come up with those kind of, you know, pro-plant-based studies and, you know, criticizing very harshly animal foods. That's what policymakers see. And if you don't have the background yourself, if you don't have the scientific background to evaluate this, well, you just accept this as the truth. And they absolutely know that. That's why they would prevent anything else from appearing.
Frédéric, thank you. We've gone through an hour. That's what we typically do here. This has been very fascinating. I thank you for doing this. I know on Twitter you're fairly active and you put out some really great stuff, really long, well thought out, very precise, detailed things with lots of resources for people. Where do people? I mean, obviously Twitter would be one place. Maybe you could tell us your Twitter handle, and where else might they find the information that you've been sharing with the world?
Well, Twitter is the place where I usually hang out most. I'm not so much active on Facebook. I mean, I have an account on Facebook, I have one on LinkedIn, but I hardly use it. So Twitter, and then I created also this website called Aleph 2020. I don't know, maybe you can put it in the notes or something. I don't know. It's a website that is trying to come up with a counter narrative. At least trying to say, look, what is being claimed here is hyperbolic. So it's not about veganism being the only single best way that we have to deal with, you know, sustainability. Animal source foods are important. You need them in the food system. I mean, it's senseless to put them out, to take them out, or to reduce them to minuscule levels. So they're important, and we explain why they are important. We explain why they are important for nutrition, and how it can be dangerous for vulnerable groups if you take them out. And we explain also what it means for sustainability and what it means about making the best of ecosystems and how they can actually improve ecosystems. You know, how livestock is needed to get to better soil health and to, if properly done, and the relation with water and the relation with atmospheric gases and so on. So it's a detailed website. You'll find all kinds of hyperlinks to studies. It's a bit of a summary, state-of-the-art summary of the literature, and it's an evolving website. So it means that if there's a new study, we'll try to incorporate it as soon as we can, so that it's a living text, which also means that some of the ideas at some point in time can change because of new insights or because of new reflections. And the website is co-written or co-endorsed, or some people are, you know, writing, some people are just reviewing or endorsing, about 40 scientists from different fields, you know, from psychology to animal production to veterinary sciences to nutrition. So there are all sorts of different people involved. And it's a starting point. It's a bit technical still as language, I have to say. It's not, you know, you need a bit of scientific background to read it properly. It's not always that easy to read, but it's a resource where everything is brought together. And I hope that some people can use it to translate it also into more easy messages that can reach the public. So that's a place where you'll find lots of my thoughts and input.
It's ALEPH 2020. Aleph.
That's it.
Okay,
yeah.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Frédéric, thank you so much, and keep up the good work. We need as many people as possible to at least to be in the discussion so that we don't have maybe things go away we may not want. So thank you so much. Thanks for being here. Enjoy your evening in Belgium, and look forward to talking to you again sometime.
Thanks, Sean.
Okay. Bye-bye, guys.
Bye.
Take care, everybody. Have a great rest of your weekend, folks. Bye-bye now.